I want to welcome everybody. This is our kind of beginning of our initiation into thinking about how archetypes impact us. We're calling it the FemmePyre Summit. And I've invited my friend and business strategist, Helen Soutar, here from the UK to come and participate in this conversation with me about how these archetypes impact real women in the real world with our lives. And so Helen's a business strategist. She works primarily with women around getting through their, would you say they're both structural obstacles, but also their internal obstacles? How would you phrase that?
Yeah, I would say that there is the practical and theoretical aspects of business, and then there is the personal and structural obstacles that get in their way. Okay.
So I've been working with Helen for about 6 months, and she's been instrumental for helping me get through some, like making sure that my stuff comes from beginning to end. So that's one of the reasons I invited her here. She's been wonderful for me. And we have a lot in common in the kind of work that we do. So I thought that it would be a great conversation for us to kind of get started.
Definitely.
Talk about how we can help other women have a FemmePyre of their own. So that's where we're going to start. So my research started about 5 years ago, and it started out because I was working in animation primarily, and I've had a long history in animation. I used to run an animation festival. I taught animation for a number of years, and then I wound up going back to get a master's degree to become a therapist, which is a long, weird story, but true nonetheless. And so in the course of doing that research, I decided that I was going to study how women were represented in family film. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to do this big study of how we looked at women who, from the very beginning of the Disney filmography and Snow White all the way to what was then the most recent film, which was Frozen. And my thesis advisor was like, that's great, fantastic, but that is not a thesis. That is like a life work project. So cut it down, make it shorter, and see what you can do with that. So I wound up studying the most recent two films at the time, which were Maleficent and Frozen. And what I discovered was that there was an archetype at the core of these films that I had never seen before. And it was really surprising to me because I hadn't expected to find her there. Mm-hmm. I thought I was writing a thesis on cartoons and women in cartoons. And right in front of me there was this archetype that I called the divided woman.
Yeah.
And what was important about her was because I had wanted to go back through the Disney canon. Once I'd written my thesis, I did, for my own benefit, go back through the Disney canon. And she was everywhere. Mm-hmm. She was in Snow White in the Seven Dwarfs in 1937. And she existed all the way through Moana, which had come out by the time I'd finished my degree. And so that made me think, okay, if the divided woman is in this group of literature, meaning animation, where else is she?
Everywhere.
She's everywhere. I found her everywhere. I found her in Bewitched on television. Yep. I found her in Legally Blonde. I found her in
Miss
Congeniality. I found everywhere I looked, she was there. And so I'm going to talk about her a little bit, but it was so important to me that I was like, I can't. Is this just a strange thing that we haven't seen her? And the more I dug into other people's works on archetypes, James Hillman, Marie-Louise von Franz, I learned that when an archetype is unnamed is when it is most dangerous.
Okay.
So let's talk a little bit briefly about archetypes. So archetypes are, and there's a history here. So we have been going round and round. Helen's like, don't be esoteric. You have to be practical. You have to make this accessible for people. And I struggle with this because I tend to get really lofty and academic. And she's like, no. What? And so
we did it.
So I would not forget. An archetype is a collection of behaviors and qualities seen and experienced together repetitively across cultures. So that is an accessible definition, right? And the reason that it's important to say it that way is that the minute you try to bring an archetype down to the world, right? So an archetype might be the hero archetype or the savior archetype. The minute you give an archetype a face, the savior is an archetype, Jesus is a symbol, right? The minute you give an archetype a face or an identity, it ceases being an archetype and it is turned into a symbol. So really important to make that distinction because a symbol is cultural,
Yes.
right? But an archetype transcends culture. So the divided woman is in every culture, and she exists everywhere. And the reason that it's so dangerous is we never name her, but we live with her every single day. And I've been practicing therapy for 5 or 6 years now, and when I bring this archetype to my women clients, their whole bodies just relax, like, oh my God, yes, that is my whole struggle.
Yeah.
And it becomes about this thing that transcends their own personal struggle, and it helps orient it in a way that supersedes their own individual experiences, so that it's not only that they are struggling, it's that they're struggling with something that is universal to being a woman.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, does that orient it for you guys? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And I'll get into the nitty gritty of it, but I just want to make sure that that I'm not getting too lofty. So.
I like that definition because it focuses it on the behaviours that you see. It's not about any particular person, it's about the attributes that they have. And I think that makes that far more accessible to think of it as just a set of behaviours. Yeah. It's a type of person. Yeah, it's the qualities and behaviours in the archetype itself. Yeah. So, and for me, it was important, because as women, we often hear about, especially someone who's been in the entertainment industry for a good part of my career, we often hear about the hero archetype, center your story around hero's journey and take the hero's journey and find the elixir of life and bring it back to your people. And there's this whole arc of the hero's journey. And as a woman, trying to write stories about women characters, it always seemed to come short because there was never this part that explained how women go through the world, right? Well, where's the part where someone, treats me a little differently because I don't fit into a stereotype of what female behavior is supposed to look like? Where's that in the story? Yeah. Right? So I've always felt that there needed to be a women's version, but I never thought that it would be me that would find it. And I'm reluctantly claiming that space. Don't be reluctant.
It just feels a little like, I don't want to tease the gods a little bit. It's hubris. Come get me. No, I don't do that. So, but anyway, we're going to get to it in a minute though. So do you have anything you want to add or ask before I jump into the divide?
In terms of the application of it for real life women, I find the same situation as you described when you tell your clients about this divided woman and they just relax. The same happens when I speak to my clients about gender stereotypes or about how actually that's because women are expected to do X, Y, Z. And I think there's a really nice interaction between those two things, because obviously we're in a moment now where gender stereotypes and expectations of women in the public eye are being questioned. We've got the Me Too movement, we've got Time's Up movement. This is all coming to the fore, and I think that this particular archetype segues nicely into that and helps to explain it from a non-adversarial perspective, because I think a lot of the other stuff is it pits men against women to a large degree. Yeah. Whereas this archetype doesn't. It says, yes, it's the patriarchy that is mostly involved in encouraging this divide, but actually this is bigger than that. This is something on a different scale. And I think it's, for me, in the world that I live in, which is very much caught up in a lot of the debates around feminism and gender and sex differences, it can get quite depressing at times, in all honesty, when you're looking at all of the statistics and all of the figures and all of the expectations that are placed on women. That can be quite hard going sometimes, and I think this offers some relief on a positive level. that's not just about, oh my gosh, haven't women been treated awfully for the last millennia? Yeah. So it's exciting.
It is exciting. So let's dive into the divided woman herself. So what I've found in my research, and there's a whole circle that goes along with this, and I'll make this available to people if they want to have access to it. There's like a life cycle of this that we can go through a little bit later. But so what happens is when we're little girls, from the time we're born till we're about 8 or 9, like right before we start to hit puberty, we start to see that there's something else happening.
Mm-hmm.
And so we start to see that there's this archetypal thing happening, right? So we don't know what to call it. We don't know what it is. We just know that there's a standard out there, right? So we're expected to be like something, like be like our moms, or be like our aunts, or be like the high school girls, or be like the 4th grade girls. So there's this standard that starts to show up. And what we don't recognize is that at that same time, we're starting to kind of be put into a category. And the categories, there are only 2, and they become a track for us. And I've given these 2 tracks completely new names. You're going to recognize some of these ideas because they show up and you'll be familiar with them. But I wanted to give them different names archetypally so they didn't fall into traps that are familiar to us, right? So the first one is the maiden in search of relationship. And I just call that MESOR. So each one of these is just the abbreviation for each one. So the MESOR is that the popular girl, right? She's the girly girl. She's the cheerleader. She's ever available. She's the pretty one. She's really good at relationships. She's good at having girlfriends. She's good at having guy friends. She's good at being married. She's good at having kids. She's good at making sure that she knows how to be out there in the world doing things that are relatable, right?
Yeah.
And she's sexually attractive, but maybe not sexually available, right? So she has all of the ingenue qualities, right? So we might if we look at the films again, we might say, oh, that's Snow White, that's Cinderella, right? Those are the maiden in search of relationship characters that we know. Or that's Elle Woods at the beginning of Legally Blonde, right? And then the other side is, I call her magical, isolated, powerful, and endangered, or MIPE. The endangered part's really important because the MESOR is protected and the MIPE is not. So one of the features of the MESOR is that she's protected by culture in her innocence, in her ingenueness, and the MIPE is isolated by her intelligence, her magic, her power, and as a result, she is unprotected. And that word endangered embodies that, that unprotectedness of her. And what the MIPE characteristics are like is she is knowledgeable, she's powerful, she's not afraid of her body or her knowledge or her magical power or her ambition or her intelligence or her ability to lead. Those things don't frighten her. She's happy embodying them, but it comes at a big price.
Yeah.
Right. So that character is the evil queen from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. She's Elphaba from Wicked. She's Sandra Bullock at the beginning of Miss Congeniality. She's Elle Woods at the end of Legally Blonde, right? So, well, maybe she's a queen, but
yes.
So you have these two sides of the divided woman. It's always one or the other. And what happens is when you're a little girl, you're 8 years old, you're kind of set up for those tracks. And if you're not a MESOR, you're going to be a MIPE. And if you're not a MIPE, you're going to be a MESOR. And you really don't get to have the benefit of both until, except while you're a little bitty girl, until you're about 10. And then once you're about 10 years old, you are put in a category. And the downside of the category is that the other side gets ostracized.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a me-sore, then you like push that me-pay away. You're like, I don't play with those girls. I'm going to pretend I'm not smart. I'm going to not be outgoing or athletic or I'm going to play dumb with the boys. It's going to be that kind of engagement.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And likewise, if you're a me-pay, then you're gonna be like, I don't like pink. I'm not gonna hang out with the cheerleaders. I'm gonna go I'm gonna be with the boys if I have to, and be in a band or
or be aloof.
Right?
Yeah.
Be unattainable.
Yeah.
Right. Or I'm just smarter than those other girls.
Yes.
That thing. And what happens is over the course of the time period, that once you're in your 20s, usually that is fixed. Mm-hmm. That is stuck. And if you are going to reconcile it, you don't really get to until maybe you're in your 30s.
Yeah.
And if you start the reconciliation process, you're lucky. Mm-hmm. And you can get to this idea of personal liberty or personal sovereignty where you can unite those two halves. And you get to, what I found in my research was that you get to sovereignty, and it shows up in the movies and the books and the fairy tales as being a queen, right? Because mm-hmm. It shows up in those images as a coronation. Mm-hmm. But it's really about having absolute control over your own identity.
Yeah.
Right. So
autonomy.
It's about having complete personal autonomy. Mm-hmm. And if you don't do that, if you don't get control of that, if you go around the circle and you get stuck at happily ever after, then it's over.
Yep.
Story's over when you get married. And that's
nearly every Disney film ever written.
Yeah. Well, not every Disney film. But certainly all the ones up until about 1978. Yep. So it winds up being really incredibly sad,
yeah.
And most women, at least in my generation, grew up with this idea that that's the goal, right? You're supposed to want that, mm-hmm. to want the happily ever after, and never question it. And so, but now I think what's happened in at least looking at the collective identity and looking at the culture and the stories and the media, we're growing past it. So if you look at Katniss Everdeen, or you look at Moana, you look at these other characters, mm-hmm. and you see that as a reflection of real women wanting to live their personal lives of full autonomy. That's not good enough anymore, yeah. Right? They want that identity of full, embodied, transcendent, personal autonomy and liberty. So I think they're becoming what I call in my work the United Queen.
But you can have aspects from both, can't you? It's more about disliking or not wanting to embrace the aspects of the ones that you don't feel you've been pushed into that.
Well, it's about the ones that. It's about the ones where you feel empowered. Yeah. So if you've been rewarded for being the pretty girl or the cheerleader or the smart girl, like you're going to be, that's where your power is going to be. Yeah. Right. And you're going to distance yourself from the other side. Yeah. But it doesn't mean you won't have characteristics of the other, just that maybe you don't show them to other people as readily. Like when I was in high school, I was total me-pay. So I'm like punk rock girl with a mohawk and
did anybody here not guess that?
And well, Trisha could, but like mohawk and crazy hair and listen to really terrible music but I secretly wanted to be a cheerleader. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't because I wanted to like be with those girls so much as that seemed exciting to me. Like I wanted to be part of that. Yeah. I wanted to wear that uniform and go out and looking at it now, it's like, of course I did, right? Like I wanted that unity. I wanted both sides of myself, the performer in me, the person who wanted to be engaged with what was happening in my high school community. Like that all was attractive to me because that's part of my identity. Yeah. I like to be involved. I like to do things. I like to be engaged, but I didn't have the access because there is this divide.
Yeah.
And high school is the worst, right? Because it's like, yeah, there's a split.
So you're asking how we can make use of Stacey's work in a real sense for women's lives, how we can apply it to their lives, and how we can make use of the two different sub-archetypes and use those as reference points when I work with the women that are running businesses. Okay, so that's a really interesting one. I think for me, the starting point has to be to look at structural oppression, because when we start there, we can start to identify that there are lots of different things that play into structural oppression. So we're looking at culture, we're looking at history, we're looking at public policy, we're looking at the way that the institutions behave, and then we're also looking at personal behaviours and belief systems. Now, when you start there, that gives us the foundations. So I can say to women, when women come to me, some of the examples I get are things like, I just haven't got enough time because I've got to get the kids ready for school, and then there's always some kind of show that we've got to be at, or a parents' evening, or, you know, I'm forever backwards and forwards and the children need to be driven 2 hours to get to school and that's my responsibility, or I have an office set up at home, but if my husband is working from home, I have to work at the dining table instead, even though I always work from home, you know, these kind of issues. And when you say to them, okay, a lot of this comes down to the set expectations that we have of women in society, that they will always make way, they will always be the ones to submit, they will always be the ones to look out for other people and make sure that their needs are attended to before they look at their own. You then start to bring in the sub-archetypes, because you'll find that some women will say, when I'm at work, I really struggle to connect and make relationships with my colleagues because I'm seen as the bossy one, I'm seen as like the bitch at the top of the company, nobody wants to come and talk to me, the feedback I get is that I'm not approachable. And this is when you can start to bring in the FemmePyre aspects. And when you start to say, you have been funneled down this particular route and you suffer from oppression on the basis of that route. And if you were to have been funneled down the Miso route, you would face different structural oppression because of that route. It's the same, all of the oppression is based on the fact that we're women and that we have the ability to create new life. That's the basis for nearly all structural oppression against women. But we tailor it specifically because it's much easier to control a group of people if you can divide them first. So if we divide them by saying, oh, well, they're them women that we just want to isolate, we want to get rid of them, oh, she's a bitch, you don't want to talk to her, you know, get her and separate her out. And then you've got these ones who are never going to amount to anything. They just like to go for coffee. Yeah. It's in the UK we call them ladies who lunch. And it's this idea that they drop their children off at school and then they go off and maybe they've got their fitness wear on and they go for a little jog around the park and then they go to a posh coffee shop and they gossip. And we downgrade their conversation to gossip because we want to make it seem less important. So it doesn't matter what they're talking about, they're gossiping. Now we use structural oppressions and gender stereotypes to divide those two types of women and to treat them slightly differently because it's less easy for women to come together and say, we're not dealing with this, this isn't okay to treat us like this, if they're already pitted against each other. And often they are, because the FemmePyre will have been promoted, because she often will behave more masculine, because that's how she can get to the points of power that she wants to have. She wants to get to a point of authority. And often they are intelligent enough to know that in the current societies that we have, they need to behave in a particular way to get to that point. And then the Misos are pushed down a very feminine route. They are expected to often show up in clothes that are revealing but not too revealing, to wear high heels maybe, or they're, flat shoes that are trendy in some way or another. They have to spend a lot of time and attention on their hair, their makeup, their personal grooming. They are expected to be able to drop everything to sign up for the school PTA. I don't know if you have PTA over here actually. Yeah, okay, that's right. And to be able to arrange play dates and so on and so forth. And then we are we encourage women who are mesors to fear women who are mepe and to see them as, oh my gosh, they're ruthless. You know, this is talking about characters. Sandra Bullock in The Proposal at the start of the film is a fantastic example of this. She is really high up in her department, but she is disliked by almost everybody because she is ruthless. And she's not. She's just she's got aspirations for her own career. But she is often seen to be quite condescending towards women that go out for lunch together, or, you know, save grandma's wedding dress and redo it for each bride, and so on and so forth. And often the women that have been pushed down that route feel that the mepe is very standoffish, is unapproachable, is not one of them. And so when you start to talk to clients who come to you with a particular problem, when you can relate that to one of those two paths and point out how actually they have aspects of both of those paths, but society has encouraged them and forced them in some cases down one or the other, you can then start to help them to unpick all of the things that are going on in their lives and to be able to recognise, what is it that I'm doing because I genuinely want to do it? And what is it that I'm doing because I feel I have to do that because of the route that I've been pushed on? And often, once you can help them to see that, they can then either, for a start, they can fully embrace the bits that they feel they've been told they can't have. So this might be, for example, mepes starting to feel that it's okay to spend more time with their girlfriends, to not be at the office until midnight every night, that it's okay to come home and put their pyjamas on and sit in front of the telly with a bowl of popcorn. You know, like, that's okay, it's all right, you know. But a lot of it is pointing out that this isn't a personal failing, because so many women think of it as this is happening to them in isolation, that it has nothing to do with any other women. All the other women around them are perfect. They are meeting all of the standards that society places on them without having to worry, without having to work hard at it. And they, on their own, are the only ones failing at this. And when you can point out and say, this is pretty much universal. This is the people that you see who appear to be completely put together, whose lives are completely organised, their children are never late to school, they've always got the right PE kit, homework, special harvest offering, I don't know, you know, they often will have career aspirations that they've not been allowed to fulfil, you know. And okay, so maybe your children do sometimes turn up in odd shoes, you know, maybe they do look like they've been dragged through a hedge backwards on the way to school, but you are able to meet your career aspirations. And this is the playoff that we've been told has to happen, that we have to choose between one or the other. And there's often a period where the women that I work with get quite cross. First, a lot of them get very defensive to start with, because it's quite an uncomfortable feeling to recognise and accept that there are things that have happened in your life because they've been imposed on you. Lots of us like to think that everything that's happened has been within our own control. And then you start to point things out and they start to see it. And then it gets even more unbearable for a while, because you realise just how many restrictions are placed on us as women. You know, when you worry about how your children are doing at school, that's because it reflects on the mums most of the time, more than the dads. You know, the dads don't often get called in to explain why their child hasn't succeeded on their particular paper, for example, whereas mums often are called in to deal with that. You know, when things like if you have fertility struggles, one of my clients is a fertility specialist, and so when we look at the challenges that her clients face, most of the time the fertility issues come from the male. But if you look at advice around how to deal with fertility issues, nearly all of it is targeted at women. It doesn't make any sense, you know? There is no logical reason for that when the medical statistics behind it show that actually you need to do more work to increase the virility of sperm than you do the eggs, you know? And there are obviously exceptions to that rule, but just in terms of what is more common, it tends to be issues with the man, and yet we focus all of our articles for the most part. You know, the advice for men is limited pretty much as wear loose boxer shorts, you know, whereas women, change your diet, get up at a set time every day and drink 3 cups of green tea, followed by 2 litres of fresh filtered water with lemon juice and cucumber in there.
Exercise and lose weight.
Exercise and lose weight, yep, absolutely. Have sex often, but not too often. Make sure that you're always available, but don't give up the rest of your life because it's unhealthy to become obsessed about this. You know, this is all placed on women, and there is very little that is targeted at men. It's as though this is not really anything to do with men. And yet they're a fairly crucial player in this in this setup. So I think when you start to explain all of this to women and give them the space to feel the emotions that come with that, to feel first the denial, then the anger, then the, oh my gosh, this affects so many different aspects of my life, you then equip them with the resilience to start to challenge those things on a personal level. And once you can get them to that point, it spreads. And you start to see that they point out to their own friends, hang on a minute, your husband works at home 1 day a month, but every time he does, you have to upstix your whole office to the dining table because there's no conversation about it, he just gets the office. You know, like once you point these things out, other women start to say to their friends, what? What are you doing? Why are you doing it like that? That doesn't make any sense. You need to at least have a conversation before you agree this, instead of it being, that's just the way it is. So I think it's really, really helpful to be able to differentiate the different types of oppression that women face, because before Stacey introduced me to her sub-archetypes, there wasn't really a good explanation as to why some women were oppressed in one way and then other women were oppressed in a different way. And so this is fantastic for explaining that and for showing that divide and how it's all the same oppression at the base of it. It's just applied differently to ensure that we are kept as a divided group. Does that help?
Very much so.
Good.
And for me, thank you for that explanation. It was wonderful. The other piece of it is that we have been, you know, this has been something that's been going on for thousands of years, right? I came across this, you know, we say it in English all the time, divide and conquer. And in Latin, it's divide et impera, which actually has a slightly different meaning to how we mean it in English. So divide, of course, is divide, but impera is also to command to the point of enslavement. So when you say divide et impera, it has a slightly more sinister meaning than divide and conquer. It means to literally put someone into a subjected position to the point where they obey your every will and word.
Yes.
And so to come across that in the idea of the divided woman, where a woman is divided against herself, where she herself embodies that point of view of, well, I have to be, you know, and this goes to what you're saying earlier about, well, I have to be perfect, but I can't be too perfect. You know, I have to be smart, but not too smart. I have to be pretty, but not too pretty. I have to be thin, but not too thin. I have to be funny, but not too funny. I have to be smart, but not smarter than the other girl or the husband or the boss or the, you know, there's always something in comparison. And for me, that is what this is about, that we, from the time we're little kids as women, we're taught to compare ourselves to something else. And I think it's the other half that we're always taught to compare ourselves to, not to our mothers or our sisters or to our fathers, but to that other half of the divide. Because you can never, we're told that we can't have that other thing. And so it always sets us up to be unsatisfied. And no man can satisfy it, no partner can satisfy it, no job can satisfy it, because it's always the other thing that we are divided from. Right? Does it make sense?
It does. And there is an element when you talk about oppression, there's 5 main ways that we oppress people. So one is with violence. That's very simple to understand one. Exploitation. So forcing people to do something and not compensating them appropriately. Marginalisation, which is what happens specifically to MePes. So they are othered. They are pushed outside of the popular group or the good group, and you need to sit over there. You're not quite the same as us. You have cultural imperialism, which is a way of making your own norms and standards, your own behaviours, the norms and standards of society. So this is seen, it's changed somewhat in the last 20 years or so, but this is seen with all job titles being centred around the masculine. So chairman, I don't know, I can't think of another another example, but businessman, bin man, all jobs ending in garbage man. But yes, a lot of them will end in man. Actress instead of actor. We're starting to get better at this. In the UK, we now say chair. We don't bother with male or female, it's just chair. But it's still this thing of the norm is men, and women are a deviation from that norm. And so everything that a woman does that is different to a man, you're instantly other. You're instantly outside of the kind of standards that are expected of you. The most important one from my perspective is powerlessness. And powerlessness is a way to ensure that people don't rise up against the oppression. And the first way of doing this is that you take away their ability to name what's going on. You prevent them from talking about it. So if you go back to the times when slavery was still very common, slaves were prohibited by their slave owners from ever talking to each other about the awful conditions that they lived in. That was just, there would be punishments if they were overheard talking about what was going on to them. You then get to the point where if you can indoctrinate them further, you can make them believe that all of the negative perceptions that you have built up around them as a class of people, when you can get that class of people to believe that those are true, you no longer need to prohibit them from talking about it, because they just won't. So when you can get black people to believe that they are lazy or that they are less intelligent, they won't speak up about that because they've internalised that as their truth. So there's a really fantastic quote from Harriet Tubman, who was a slave.
The Underground Railroad leader.
Yeah, and she freed a lot of slaves, didn't she? And the quote that she gave was, "I could have freed thousands more if only they had known they were slaves." And it's this idea that these people had internalised these negative perceptions as truth so much that when she said, "Come on, we can go, you're free," they didn't believe that they hadn't been free previously. They just believed that they got what they deserved. And I think that's often the case for women in particular. We believe that it's just normal that when you go out with friends, if one of you wants to leave early, of course you don't let her go by herself. Of course somebody gets in the taxi with her. Of course you all leave at the same time. Of course when one of you wants to go to the toilet, somebody else holds her drink and it's not just left on the table to the side. That's the kind of central tenet to feminism. You have to be able to name your oppressor.
That's right.
Because if you can't, how do you explain all of this stuff that goes on anything other than an individual level?
Yeah.
Well, it's the same thing for psychology, right? If you can't name what is happening to you, then you can't cure it, you can't integrate it, you can't heal it, you can't do anything.
That's right.
Because then it's just an amorphous experience that has no root, no cause, no movement. It's just happening to you, and no solution. And so you can't ever identify it so that you can solve a problem or figure out if it's a pattern or know how to address it.
Yeah.
So naming things becomes an act of, it becomes the first step in radical sovereignty, like that thing that you plant a flag and you say, no, I'm going to own myself.
Yep.
Right? And by owning myself, the trick to owning myself is to first say, there is no one who owns me but me, and here is the territory of that.
Yeah.
Me with all my flaws, me in my identities, whatever they may be, as a mother, as a teacher, as a wife, as a single person, as a, pick your thing, as a MePy.
I think it also, though, by doing that, you also create a boundary where you say, these expectations are not me.
Right.
They are something that's been given to me, A little bit like privilege, you know, privilege is not something that any of us take. We are just gifted it by society, and it is a poison chalice most of the time. But it's the same with these expectations. We don't take them. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, do you know what? I really wish that I could be oppressed on the basis of being intelligent and wanting authority and having ambitions for my career. So do you know what? That's the route I'm going to take, because I really want to be isolated. I really want to be pushed outside of the more popular demographic in my workplace or my school or my friendship group. You know, nobody does that, but it's something that is forced onto us. And I think when you can name it, you can separate it out from yourself. So you can reunite yourself with other women while separating women out from the expectations that are placed on them. So it changes it from us being individual women with these expectations as being an inherent part of ourselves to us being a group of women facing up against a group of expectations that do us harm. Does that make sense?
Cool. Well, let's see if there are any more questions before we take a quick break. And
I've got so many questions that nobody's. There's just like educational applications to this.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of how I work with children.
Yeah.
Because we've been really working on how we use gender language. Like, we don't use he guys.
Yeah.
So just like a bunch of things like that. And I'm wondering how the new generation of children, grown up girls in this time right now, what that's going to mean in reference to this work also.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting one, I think, because I think that we are in this place where we are trying to avoid keeping everything at a very masculine level. But often what ends up happening is that we take away all separations. So we take away any language that's specific to girls as well. So you see this now with, there's a lot of people who will declare their pronouns. You know, I go by they and them. But actually, that almost just reinvigorates it from a different perspective. That still brings us back to, you cannot just be you. If you don't fit that stereotype or that stereotype, you've got to call yourself them instead, or they. You can't just be you, and because of your biology you are this, so we can use these pronouns, because we have gone entrenched even further into what the stereotypes are. So it's working, yes, with the MyPe and Miso, but we've also got it on a masculine and feminine basis as well. And it used to be that you could have masculine women and feminine men and vice versa. And now we're moving further away from that. When you look at children's toys, for example, I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, but certainly in the UK, when I was growing up, most children's toys were red, yellow, blue, green, brown, black, you know. Now they're pink and blue.
No, they're making a shift now. That's not accurate in the States. It's shifting now.
Right. Well, ours is just starting to shift in the last couple of years.
The past decade.
Yes. Oh, it's not that long in the UK.
Especially, it's come from education now, because we say we're not buying that garbage. And
yes.
If teachers go to conferences and they'll say we're not getting a pink kitchen, we'll have a kitchen, but it needs to be regular wooden, because everybody wants to work in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Because that's where delicious things are made. So
yeah.
There is a cultural shift now.
Well, in the UK, that is just starting. It was about 2 years ago that a campaign was started called Let Toys Be Toys. Yeah. But up until that point, there was very little pushback against the kind of wave of pink and blue. Yeah. And it's happened the same with clothes for children, you know, it's very much pink and blue. And that then throws up extra problems for MyPes, because they often can't stand pink, you know. But then if they're forced to shop in the boys department, that then throws up other issues around, well, does this mean I'm not really a girl? Or, you know, how do you really work out what your identity is if you are presented with two very clear sets of stereotypes and told that it's not okay to deviate from those? Yeah. And I think that reinforces a lot of the stuff that Stacey's talking about with Miso and MyPe. You know, I think it can mean that MyPe women tend to get a bit more entrenched, because it becomes an act of rebellion to reject what is being pushed on us as womanly. What they really mean is femininity. You know, you need to perform femininity to be classed as a woman. And for MyPes, that doesn't work. You know, that is no.
Yeah, I'm still a woman. I just also want to be smart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have my own power.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to wrap this up because we have to keep things moving. But Helen's going to be here, and we'll make sure that her contact information is available because she's amazing if anybody wants to work with her. So, so I'm so grateful that you're here.
No, I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm so grateful for all the questions and everybody's interest. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.